In an activist world that demands constant work and resilience, taking the time to rest, to heal, to care for ourselves is not a luxury. It's a necessary, defiant act of survival. My name is Brian Finnegan, and welcome to the Frontline, a podcast from ILGA-Europe in Brussels, taking you to the front lines of LGBTI activism in Europe and Central Asia. In this very special episode, we're taking a deep dive into radical self-care, and in particular on the intersections of queerness, race and mental health, and for activists on those intersections. Our guests are Suranee and Director at Rainbow Mind in the UK, an LGBTQI+ mental health service, and Suranee's colleague at Rainbow Mind's Senior Practitioner Uz, who has co-developed the Radical Self-Care Programme. Welcome, Suranee and Uz. Suranee, to begin with, maybe if you could tell us a bit about Rainbow Minds and the work you do.
Thank you. Yeah, we're a charity programme. We're run out of London and Manchester in the UK. We've been in existence for about 6 years, and we were primarily set up to respond to what we felt was a mental health crisis in the LGBTQI community here. And it was really, we were born out of a more general mental health charity, but there were certainly some individuals within two of the local minds that we were working in that we felt that there was a real gap in provision. We saw a real need. And we really set up to bring our own lived experience to mental health provision. We wanted to empower our own community and really fight against health inequality, because we've all felt that. We've all felt that, you know, trying to get culturally appropriate help from people that really understand what you're going through and understand the, you know, sometimes the level of trauma going on and the mental health issues for this community. So that was how Rainbow Mind was born. I think important thing to say is everyone in our organisation and across our programmes, practitioners and leadership is LGBTQ. Many are from intersectional backgrounds, so we've sort of deliberately, you know, tried to look for people with multiple intersections across the spectrum, but also, you know, different intersections. And the types of things we offer: one-to-one therapy, something called radical self-care, which we're going to talk about in great detail today. We also do lots of wellbeing activities, movement classes, and have a focus on youth programs as well, because we think there's a particular need for LGBTQ young people and taking care and supporting their mental health. I think in setting up the organisation 6 years ago, the thing that sort of really galvanised what we were and who we were was this new method called radical self-care, which you know Uz has co-created and we've won awards for. And the reason for we'll come on to talk about what it is and why it is, but it was about, you know, basically designing something that allowed us to reclaim our own narrative around mental health and resilience. And I think we continue to innovate and co-design services at the moment. Recently, we've put together a youth committee, and they've had a lot of input into what we offer and why we offer it to young people. Also co-creating with refugees and asylum seekers, which we'll go on and talk about. And I suppose more bespoke services for, I guess, the wider, you know, more general intersection between people of colour and LGBTQ. And those have been some of the areas that we've really focused in on in the last few years.
So we'll be talking about radical self-care in more depth, as you said, later on. But let's talk maybe about the context in which you're working at the moment and how you see self-care within the context of the UK and on the intersections of race and queerness.
I would say a good place to start with this, any question or conversation about self-care, is to go to Audre Lorde and this fantastic quote, which is that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So Audre Lorde, amazing poet, activist, and person that has inspired us greatly. So yeah, for us, self-care it's not just, I mean, it is candles and bubble baths, that's part of it as well, but it's not just that. Sometimes that's what we might think about if you think about care and self-care, but actually it's radical, it's political, it's essential for us. And so within the context of the work that we're doing, it's something that we knew we mindfulness is something that's very well established, and that's what I was teaching mainly before radical self-care came along. But then we saw what we've heard from Suranee before about the fact that we're not having our outcomes are not what they need to be for queer communities in terms of mental health and provision and so on. So that's why we brought self-care into the mix. And when it comes to the intersection of race and queerness, it's like a double whammy. It's a double amazingness of having, being a person of color, being queer, amazing, celebrate. It's just that that's not how the world, society, media, communities, necessarily families see us. And so that's where it becomes, that the term, Kimberly Crenshaw's term in intersectionality comes in. We have these overlapping layers of oppression. And so, my goodness, every human needs self-care and radical self-care. And if you're queer, you need it even more. If you're a person of color and queer, you need it doubly. And add on any other intersections, and there are many, and we, work with people with even more intersections, then that's the context. And that's why it is so crucial that we are supporting ourselves and our communities in this way.
So looking specifically at those intersections, queerness, race, mental health, Suranee, tell us the story of how the organisation has been working over the past 2 years.
Yeah, there's been a lot of change in the organisation and in society and for the LGBTQ community, I think, in the last 2 years. And I think that has really affected the mental health of the people that we serve. But I think through working with people like ILGA and other funders, we've really been able to kind of fully realise our values around respect and inclusivity. And I guess going further to co-create programmes of culturally appropriate radical self-care for people of colour who are also LGBTQ. We've really looked at our values and we tried to fulfil those, I guess, on an organisational level as well. That's something I was just going to add to the last question. For us, radical self-care also has to be something that is intrinsic within the way we work. We've all done the course ourselves. We're bringing it into every meeting that we have. We're making very conscious efforts to design our kind of workflow, our meetings, our attitudes to each other, the way that we speak to each other, everything, flat hierarchy. That all comes from this, the genius of the radical self-care kind of initial idea. So that's been quite interesting as well to see that kind of grow and try to teach that to other people, and lots of new people coming and going, and new practitioners coming on board. And I think, like, as a community of care in itself, trying to walk the walk, which I think we do really well. I think generally we've seen an increase of trauma and minority stresses for people of colour who are also LGBTQ. Things have been magnified further because of the general climate out there. So I think it feels like, for us personally and our clients, feels like we're kind of being attacked from all sides. So we have to be even more kind of conscious and deliberate about the way that we're co-designing things and the way that we're actually adapting to, quite big changes that are happening to communities. So we're looking further into our own lived experience and the lived experience of the people that we're working with, and we're adapting our services. And I think, certainly the ILGA grant has allowed us to really go deep with certain groups, with certain partnerships within this intersection, both large and small. And we're starting to give more platforms to talk about this in the mainstream a bit more. Thinking about this, in other people's workplace, our workplace, we're being asked to talk, go into the corporate world and talk about this intersection, which, to be honest, 2 or 3 years ago, no one would even think about these two things together. I mean, you'd have a more general LGBTQ, pride awareness across the outside world or the corporate world, but increasingly we are being asked to talk about this, and I think that's what's been going on in the world for these two. If you think about those two worlds, kind of when they collide, there's been so many stresses coming down. So I think it's just meant that we've had to be even more collaborative, really, with both other organisations working in this area and also our clients. Now it's more a matter of course that we would collaborate on most most sessions, as opposed to just have, maybe what we had a few years ago was, a really good framework that would work for a more general LGBTQ population. And now it's about actually really going a bit deeper and adapting that to, a few different intersections. So that's been a big change and really positive step forward in terms of doing sort of deeper work, I think, with this intersection.
So before you went deep, what were your assumptions about the work, and what have you learned along the way?
Yeah, we wanted to go really wide, first of all, and we've had kind of discussions with ILGA about this as well in terms of our findings. I think 2 years ago we did a kind of an entire consultation with as many LGBTQ, BAPOC organisations and, people within our client base, lots of focus groups, lots of debate and conversation, just kept it really open. And we wanted to know all the challenges and understand all the macro themes. And I think we got some really, really, really valid learning out of that. Some really interesting debates started. And I think community as a theme and spaces to gather, so safe spaces, was a huge theme. And I think we started to design our programs accordingly around that. But we realised there were so many different experiences, and you were always like just scraping off the top of it, all these different experiences, and it just felt like you couldn't really get deep into the issues without doing probably a PhD. But it did feel like there were so many different experiences that weren't all the same within this group by any means, and they weren't even a group. We're not a homogenous group at all, because so many different cultural backgrounds and things like that. So we realised that we did need to go. We started off wide, and then we just needed to dig deeper with some particular groups. And again, we identified those that being the ones that we felt at the time were most at risk of mental health issues, and the ones that weren't getting access to very much help, such as refugees and asylum seekers.
What emerged from that work for you?
I think it was really humbling work to do this, because, as I said earlier, working with anybody, I run a course also for general populations, and everybody, as I say, needs this. And then when you start working with queer populations and people of colour, it's like just the degrees of challenge that people face in their lives, and discrimination and prejudice, and then internalized racism, bi-homo-transphobia, and so on. All of this increases, and then bring in the identity of being a refugee or asylum seeker, and that identity, or actually like that, seeking for a status, just what that adds to the mix, and to basically the level of challenge and the level of trauma that people have experienced, was something that we had to adapt in order to be able to support such a population. So what emerged from that work was new ways of working. So we created something called Creative Connective Care, CCC, because what we realized is that we couldn't do the same practices that we were doing with the populations we'd worked with previously, because for example, some of our practices might take you into a place of working with a challenge that you have in your life, working with a particular challenge, bringing that to mind in order to then find a way to support ourselves with that. But actually, we do not want to be putting these people into any kind of challenge, because what so often happens, you go to a challenge and actually the challenges they're facing are so huge, even if you suggest let's go to something more manageable, their minds may well go to the trickiest things, which are just absolutely horrendous experiences some of these people had had. So we needed to adapt our practices and bring in a lot more creativity and a lot more connection, because a lot of these people are very isolated. A lot of these refugees and asylum seekers, they're not all in one location. They're all around the country. And for them, for me, it was, when I talk about humbling, like just how they would feel about coming to a session once a week. Like they talk about it being like the highlight of their week, to have this short, time that we're having together, because there's connection there, and there's care, and there's creativity. That's why our creative connective care. So creativity was something. Also, it was really amazing, because For example, part of that creativity was bringing in music. We have a practice where we bring in helpful, supportive phrases. We think of those for ourselves that we can apply for ourselves. That can be hard to do for anybody. So then maybe you think about what might you say to a friend. Even that might feel hard. So actually what we did is like, what would Beyonce say to you? What would, whoever else is your favorite singer? I saw her last week, so she's on my mind. What would, whoever else say to you? And so then we'd basically have these listening parties. We'd have these really uplifting listening parties. Here are these people that are like really, really struggling in their lives. And then we'd all be sitting around the screen dancing and bopping about and just enjoying that connection. So that's one thing that happened. And we co-created. So we had some establishing sessions before even moving to the course where we were asking, what is it that would be helpful for you? What do you need? What could support you? How can we support you? So there was lots of this and just a continual kind of checking in around that. And that's also what helped. What emerged is just, we know that, but the importance of co-creation.
Okay, so let's move into the radical self-care element of this work. Why do you call radical self-care radical?
So we were inspired by a quote. I don't think we've ever been able to attribute it, but this quote is that in a society that profits from your self-doubt, liking yourself is a radical act. So that's what we started with. And that's it. This is the world we live in, isn't it? And forget just self-doubt. It's self-doubt. It's also self-criticism, self-hatred, especially if we're thinking about some, our identities, queer identities, POC identities. So yeah, absolutely. In a climate and culture like that, which has increased in its level of challenge since we established this program, I would say the current climate in terms of being a person of colour and queer. So in a society that is offering you that, then absolutely liking yourself is a radical act to stand up to that. So that's why it's radical, and also because it's not what we're encouraged to do. It's not what we're it's just not the messaging that we received or the education that we received to care for ourselves. So this is absolutely radical, and then especially given our communities. And like I say, this course was established, it was created for LGBTQ plus communities. So what's interesting is that with a lot of organizations or programs, they're created for a general population and then they make them specific. Whereas for us, we went in specific. We were thinking about people of color. We were thinking about queer communities. And then we broadened out and like to bring in, everybody else. So it was kind of a different way around.
So as you're broadening out, one of the programs you're going to run is Radical Self-Care for BIPOC Queer Activists. How did this program come about and why do you think it's needed?
Yeah, it's been really, that's been another interesting journey actually on our current project in the last 2 years with the ILGA funding. I think we're all a lot of us that work at Rainbow Mind are already activists in some way or volunteering or out on the streets doing other things as well. But I think being part of a sort of pan-European community that this project has allowed us to be part of meant that we had more exposure to many more different groups, coming over to the conferences, and just with the collaborations that we've been making with various different groups as well. I think we realised that there was, it was getting worse in a way for the people that were trying to care and self-care and be the carriers of, and support people. And I think that, that we're not separate. We're not a separate group. We need to sort of radically care for ourselves as well. But I think there was some sort of unique challenges that came with being a queer person of colour who is an activist. That it was interesting that we in the about a year and a half, over a year ago, we just did some like taster sessions. I think we just did 3, didn't we? As that you and I ran, and it was just a very simple format where we got together some of the people from the wider programs and allowed a space for people just to share, to come together, but also do some practices, mindfulness practice, and some things from radical self-care. And it was just such a profound couple of sessions, because it really felt like people hadn't got together and been able to share like that. And we were quite moved actually about those sessions, and it just felt like some of the people there were supporting huge groups whilst also being asylum seekers themselves, and just like the emotional load that people were carrying, and just even coming together with even quite a small number of people and seeing other people who, kind of were very reflective of you, but also going through the same struggles, battling the same guilt about not doing enough for other people, but then also not caring for yourself. So that was, that just felt a very powerful place that we needed to do more work in, basically. So I think we've looked for opportunities and looked within the funding to do more sessions, and that we've done some more this year, and we're actually going to go a bit deeper and do some more courses next year.
So in that respect of going deeper and doing more courses, how are you going to approach the work? It's much needed, obviously.
Yeah, I think, as I was saying, with the work we did with the refugee and asylum seeker communities, I think the co-creation, co-design will be an important part of it. Just to be able to make sure we have our basic toolkit and approach, and we have our program and our practices and reflections and so on, but we want to adapt it to make sure that it is what's going to be most helpful for this activist community. I do think as well, based on the sessions that we've had so far, again, creativity and connection really seem to be, and community is all the C's for some reason, seem to be things that were helpful in our last sessions. So even like the simplest thing, like when we started, this was actually one of our colleagues at Rainbow Mind, Frankie, had this lovely idea that she'd done somewhere where I don't remember what we called it now, but we had just an opening screen where, as a way of connecting on arriving, we were just mark making. So people were drawing, they were writing, there were emojis, there were GIFs. But it was just so lovely, and the seeing it coming together, and the fact that there's like scores of us there, we're all creating this together, and we're all coming together. So it was the community, the creation, the fun, the joy, the lightness, the truth of that shared experience was something quite powerful. So that was literally just the first few minutes. So I think creativity will be a key part of it. I'm imagining things like manifestos for self-care, poetry, music, dance, all the good stuff.
I love all the good stuff, and Beyonce lyrics. So with that in mind, what are the elements of the toolbox for radical self-care?
Sure. Well, so radical self-care has two pillars. Well, one is mindfulness and the other is self-care. And both of those, I feel, are crucial, in us navigating this experience of life as, queer people of color, or just queer communities, or all the various different intersections we work with, young people, older people, trans, non-binary, etc. There's various different specific groups that we'll be working with. For all of us, we need the support of the mindfulness. That gives us the ground, the stability, the awareness we need to, as I say, navigate this path, this life. So that's a kind of a solid grounding that we need. And the mindfulness comes in a few ways. So there's formal mindfulness practice. And just to say, in case a few words are needed on what mindfulness is. So the simplest way I like to describe it is noticing with kindness. Just these nice 3 words, noticing with kindness. Add in a few words, is noticing our experience in the present moment with kindness. And we can practice that formally. So what I mean by that is we're not doing anything else. We're just stopping, and we're just focusing on whatever it is. It might be sounds, it might be the body, it might be the breath. And that's something that we can build up our capacity, our skill at being aware and mindful. And the more we can do that, just the more helpful it is really in literally every aspect of life. So there's mindfulness, formal mindfulness, and then there's mindfulness in daily life. That's another key aspect, which is just, making a cup of tea and knowing that you're making a cup of tea, just being aware of the taste, the smell, the sound, the feel, and so on, rather than the mental checking out that we so often do when we're engaged in everyday activities. And the problem there is that because we have a negativity bias, bless us, we default to the negative. So instead, if we're able to bring our attention into just even those simple sensory details of experience, it means we're actually, regaining and reclaiming just all the moments of our lives rather than losing it towards the negative. So that's mindfulness. And then the other pillar of the course is self-care. And I think we've sort of talked about already, about why that is so essential. So I probably won't say that, but yeah, we need it so hugely. And also I feel it does get missed. It kind of gets missed. I think mindfulness gets more airtime and I'm all for mindfulness. I can talk about it day and night, but self-care, which I could also talk about endlessly, is just as essential, I think, because the times we live in and the humans that we are that can be so hard on ourselves, and especially if you're a queer person that gets messaging that you're not okay or you're not all right as you are. And then if you take on that messaging, which so many of us do from an early age, and then that's what you've got going on inside your head as you live your life. So there's a lot to be done to turn that around, and so that we can be showing all that love and care and good stuff that we show to everyone else out there in the world. So self-care, we've got some practices that support us to practice in times of challenge, which for me, that's like there's one of those practices is my absolute go-to. And nearly every time I have a challenge, that practice is there for me, which is, I feel really shows like just how powerful it is. And to be able to have that, to be able to be there for yourself is quite incredible, because for so long I never could. And then there's also self-care in daily life. And we look at how we can care for ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. So that's those are some of the elements of the toolbox for radical self-care. And maybe just say one more thing, which is recognizing our common humanity. That's another thing that we bring in. It's just really, although of course we're all we have we're not a homogenous group, but we are all humans struggling, doing our best, and so that can help us to feel less isolated and alone with our struggles when we can remember and connect in that way.
Just adding to that as well, just the format of the course as well. It's a group course as opposed to a one-to-one exercise like one-to-one therapy. And I think that sense of, self-care sometimes sounds quite isolating, like, oh, I've got to do it all myself. But actually, we do believe, and I think through certainly radical self-care, the way it's been adapted, particularly for a people of colour audience and all the ILGA work we've done, I feel like that self-care that's coming, community care, like community healing, is something that's happening during the sessions and during the 8 weeks that you spend together, that you're listening and sharing these experiences, doing the practices together, getting work to do in between. I feel like I've really seen that. I've seen people across all the courses that I've been on and all the sessions that I've attended, that sense of community and doing it together with a group of people has been really huge as well. So whilst it's not necessarily a pillar, it seems like it's a mechanism that makes it more powerful.
I think that we have to remember our community at this moment in time and our common humanity. I think it's a real time for radical self-care in the world. Maybe if you could tell us a concrete story about your radical self-care work and or somebody you worked with and how it played out.
I can actually think of a couple of colleagues. This is a similar story for actually a couple of people who were on the first courses that we did. Actually, it's probably not helpful to think of two. Let me think. I'm going to go for one of them who was on one. Actually, this person was on the first course that we did, which was for queer people of colour, and it was in summer of 2020, and that was a horrendous time in the world. There was COVID. There was the death of George Floyd, like just horrendous death, murder. It was a really, really difficult, activating time in the world, especially to be a person of colour, to be a queer person. And we had this course, and something that was amazing that happened on this course was that literally within, it felt like moments of this course starting, we got to, it will sound maybe really strange, but there's this theory of groups, of how groups work, which is the Tuckman model of groups. And what it says is that groups, they form, I might get this slightly wrong, but they form, finding a place of norm, of feeling okay, performing, and storming. Oh, goodness.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, basically, the ultimate is to get to performing. That bit I can't remember, right? So performing is where like the group is gelled and it's flying and amazing things are happening. And often, we need to get to storming first. We need to do all the other things to be able to get to performing. And literally what happened in this group was just within moments, it felt like we were there. We were somewhere so deep and so connected and so beautiful. And it was needed. So in terms of the person, your question was why did they needed it? I think they needed it because it was just a hellish time to be, a person of color in the world at that time with what was happening. People were waking up to the fact that Black Lives Matter, the fact that we need to look at the racism that is systemic, that is everywhere, and so on, and as well as being a group that was for a queer community, just that intersection was such that, everybody just needed it. They really, really needed it. And this person got a lot from the course, so much so that then they joined a training where we then had a pilot training where we trained others in this modality. And then they continued to work with us, to collaborate and work with us on our offerings. And it's been like a really amazing. And like now, we work together, so it's been amazing. First I was with them, they were a participant, I was a practitioner, and now we work together and we create things. Actually, this person is particularly creative, and so we've done some really great creative things together. So that's one person. Someone else I'm thinking of is actually, I'm going to give a super fresh one, which is from last night when I was running a course, and somebody there who's actually a returner. So they've found a course really helpful before, and now they've returned and had another go at this course called self-care. And they shared a poem. It was just this really beautiful moment where they shared a poem which was to do with their learning from the previous session. And it was so beautiful. It was really like something you would just pick up in a incredible poetry anthology and read. And it was radical self-care. It was just all over. It was to do with a treasure, like this kind of hidden treasure that we have that actually that in our home, at the home of ourselves, but actually we can't find it because there's all the chaos that's around. And actually how we have that, even if we can't see it, it's there. And to be able to find that within ourselves. It was so beautiful. And just the connection between the group and just seeing how this person, obviously I'm not going to go into their story, but they just had some enormous struggles. That's, in a way, that's quite a sort of privilege to have the initial conversation with someone before they join a course, and you just, really get a sense of their lives. And just finding how hard it can be for people. And then when you see them on the course, and then you see them getting these insights and turning corners and writing poetry and inspiring everybody else, it's really special.
It seems that creativity, as you've said, is really core to the work. I'm wondering, as we kind of come to the end of our discussion, what do you think are the two systemic changes that really need to happen in terms of access to mental health and health justice for queer BIPOC people?
Yeah, I think we need to think about like how people are getting help and who's giving the help, because I think for us, radical self-care itself is a vehicle to train people. So not only are people coming for general mental health support, but LGBTQ therapists are coming through the doors for us to be trained up. So I think one of the systemic changes is around like democratization and access to training for queer and particularly people of colour, actually, because the mental health and the healthcare system, some parts of the healthcare system, and certainly the more therapeutic side, is quite white and straight. So I guess that democratization around training, uplifting and giving people those opportunities is really big. And then a second change that we felt must happen is, I guess, it's visibility in a more general sense, even on a micro level, representation, work done around safe language and training more generally across the healthcare system, because we're reacting in a way. Rainbow Mind is reacting to a lot of health inequality that's built up over the years, and that's not just against LGBTQ people, that's against people of colour, that's against women. There's a lot of health inequality there in terms of getting care, and I think there's so much work to be done in that area to create psychological safety for people so they go and get help, because there's quite a lot of resources out there for help, and I think people are still scared. So it's just about that, creating that psychological safety, thinking about language, representation, which then comes back from where you're starting at the bottom and training people of all types of backgrounds so that they can, people feel safe, basically, coming forward.
Thank you so much, both of you, for talking to us today about this. I think it's really important work, always, but especially in the context we find ourselves now, and many people find themselves. So thank you for telling us about it. And really interesting that you're working with activists, the people who are out there helping other people. Maybe we can talk again in the future and see how that work is going.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the Frontline, ILGA-Europe's LGBTI activism podcast. Thank you to our contributors to this episode, Suranee and Uz. Details of Rainbow Minds in the UK are available in the episode description. And please subscribe to our podcast, like and share from wherever you get your podcasts. Join us next time when we'll be travelling further on the front lines of LGBTI activism in Europe and Central Asia. Bye for now.